A single mother was fired for being late while helping an injured person on the street. It was her millionaire boss. When he found out, he took an action that changed everything and even fell in love with her. A story of kindness and love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are watching from. The January morning promised to be like any other for Sarah Johnson, 32, until the rain began to fall with an intensity that turned the streets of New York City into small urban rivers. Her brown hair, usually tied up in a practical bun, started to come undone under the persistent drizzle as she hurried down Fifth Avenue, firmly holding the small, warm hand of Lily, her 8-year-old daughter. "Mommy, are we late again?" Lily asked, her brown eyes, identical to her mother's, reflecting a worry that no child should carry. "No, sweetheart. We'll make it on time," Sarah lied, checking the watch that pulsed on her slim wrist. It was already 7:45 a.m., and she needed to drop Lily off at school by 8 a.m. to make it to the office by 8:30 a.m. After 2 years working as an administrative assistant at Tech Innovate, a tech company in the city center, she had never been late. Her punctuality was almost obsessive, a result of a upbringing where every minute of delay meant a scolding, a disappointment, a confirmation that she wasn't good enough. The school building was already in sight when something caught her attention. On the wet sidewalk near the traffic light that had just turned red for pedestrians, a man in a dark suit lay motionless. An expensive-looking electric bike was toppled a few meters away, its wheels still slowly spinning. The rain pelted his pale face, and a small pool of blood began to form near his head. Sarah stopped abruptly, causing Lily to almost trip. "Mummy, what is it?" "Stay here, Lily, don't move." Sarah approached the man, her heart racing. He looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair at the temples, features marked by a life of responsibilities. His suit, even wet, was clearly expensive, Italian perhaps. A shiny gold Rolex gleamed on his wrist, contrasting with the vulnerability of his position. "Sir, are you okay?" Sarah knelt on the wet sidewalk, ignoring the cold water that immediately soaked her knees. Her hands trembled as she checked if he was breathing. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man slowly opened his eyes, revealing a confused but surprisingly gentle gaze. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Don't try to talk. I'm calling an ambulance." Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling hands, dialing 911 while trying to shield the device from the rain with her body. "EMS? I need an ambulance on Fifth Avenue near 1547. There's a man down. It looks like he had a bike accident." "Yes, he's conscious, but he has a head injury." While waiting for the paramedics, Sarah remained kneeling beside the stranger, one hand shielding his head from the rain and the other gently holding his hand. It was a strange, almost intimate connection between two people who had never met. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, using the same sweet tone she used to calm Lily during storms. "The ambulance is on its way. What's your name?" The man tried to speak again, and this time he managed to whisper, "David." "David Miller." "David, I'm Sarah. You had an accident, but you're going to be fine. Is there someone I can call to let them know?" He weakly shook his head, and Sarah noticed a deep sadness in his eyes that went beyond physical pain. There was something lonely about that well-dressed man, something that touched her empathetic soul. Lily approached timidly. "Mommy, is the uncle going to be okay?" "Yes, sweetheart. Stay close, but don't disturb." The sound of the siren finally echoed down the street, and Sarah felt immense relief. The paramedics arrived quickly, efficient professionals who took control of the situation. As they examined David and prepared the stretcher, he held Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you for not just walking by." Sarah smiled, still holding his hand. "Anyone would do the same." "No," he murmured as he was placed on the stretcher. "Not everyone would stop." When the ambulance left, Sarah finally looked at her watch. 8:35 a.m. Her stomach dropped. She was late, very late. Lily would also be late for school, and she would be late for work for the first time in 2 years. "Mummy, are we going to get in trouble?" Lily asked as they hurried toward the school. "No, sweetheart. We did the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing has consequences, but it's still the right thing to do. Sarah dropped Lily off at school, quickly explained to the secretary the reason for their delay, and rushed to the bus stop. Throughout the journey to the city centre, her hands still trembled slightly. The image of David's eyes, that mix of pain and gratitude, remained etched in her mind. She arrived at the Tech Innovate building at 9:15 a.m., nearly an hour late. The mirrored glass building in the heart of New York City always intimidated her a bit. It was a different world from hers, a place where people like David moved naturally, while she always felt like a well-behaved intruder. In the elevator, she tried to fix her wet hair and smooth down the blouse that had clung to her body due to the rain. Her shoes made an unpleasant noise with each step, leaving small puddles on the corridor floor. "Sarah!" The sharp voice of Mark Thompson, her supervisor, echoed through the office as she appeared. All the other employees looked up from their desks, creating that awkward silence that precedes public humiliation. Mark was a 45-year-old man, thin and always impeccably dressed, known for his inflexibility and for treating subordinates with a coldness that made the workplace feel even more daunting. Coldness that was almost cruel. His small, piercing eyes always seemed to look for flaws, and his mouth rarely curved into anything resembling a smile. "Can we talk in my office?" he said, but it wasn't really a question. Sarah followed him down the hallway, feeling the curious and some sympathetic gazes of her colleagues. Mark's office was a reflection of his personality, cold, obsessively organized, with no personal touch beyond a framed diploma and a photo of him receiving a Manager of the Year award. "Have a seat," he ordered, closing the door behind him. 45 minutes late, Sarah. 45 minutes. "Mark, I can explain. There was an accident on the street. A man had fallen, and I don't care," he interrupted, raising his hand. "I don't care if it was an accident, if it was traffic, or if it was an alien. A delay is a delay. In 2 years here you built a reputation for punctuality, and today you destroyed all of that." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes, but she forced herself not to let them fall. "Please, Mark, it was an extraordinary situation. A man was injured in the rain. I couldn't just—" "You could," he said coldly, opening a drawer in his desk. "You could and should have. It's not your responsibility to care for strangers on the street. Your responsibility is to be here on time, doing your job." He pulled out a white envelope from the drawer, already prepared, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Mark, please. I need this job. I have a daughter, bills to pay." "You should have thought about that before playing Mother Teresa on the street," he replied, extending the envelope. "This is your termination letter for just cause." Unexcused lateness. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Just 'cause that meant she wouldn't be entitled to unemployment insurance, wouldn't receive the severance pay, and would lose almost all her labor rights. "This is unfair, Mark. You know I'm a good employee. I've never been late before. I've never caused any problems." "Fairness is arriving on time," he replied, already getting up from his chair. "You can gather your things. Security will escort you out." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Her legs felt like they couldn't support her properly. "What if I appeal? What if I sue the company?" Mark smiled for the first time in the conversation, but it was a cruel smile, devoid of any human warmth. "With what money, Sarah? And against whom?" "Against a company that has the best lawyers in the city. You signed a contract that stipulates termination for just cause in case of unexcused lateness. Read Clause 15. The room began to spin slightly around Sarah. 2 years of dedication, of always arriving 15 minutes early, of staying later when necessary, of never complaining about low salaries or lack of adequate benefits, all destroyed by a gesture of humanity. Can I at least get my things?" "Of course. 5 minutes. The security guard is waiting outside." Sarah left the office in shock. Colleagues avoided her gaze as she gathered her few personal belongings in a cardboard box, a mug with a picture of Lily, a small cactus that tried to brighten her desk, some personal documents, and a photo from her graduation in business administration. "Sarah," whispered Claudia, the receptionist, "I'm so sorry. "This is an injustice." Sarah just nodded, not trusting her voice at that moment. The security guard, a middle-aged man with a sympathetic but professional expression, escorted her to the elevator. "It's a shame, Miss Johnson," he said softly. "You've always been polite to us." When the elevator doors closed, Sarah finally allowed the tears to fall. 28 floors down to the ground, 28 floors to try to process what had happened. Her life had changed completely in one morning. A gesture of compassion had cost her livelihood, the livelihood of her daughter. Outside, the rain continued to fall, now lighter, but enough to mix with her tears as she wandered aimlessly through the streets of New York City, carrying her small cardboard box and a completely uncertain future. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and David Miller still felt a throbbing pain in his head whenever the weather changed. The penthouse in Brooklyn, with its 300 square meters and panoramic view of the city, had never felt so empty as during those days of forced recovery. The white walls, adorned with contemporary artworks that cost more than most people earn in a year, echoed his lonely footsteps through the marble corridors. Dr. Henry Carter, his personal physician for over a decade, had been clear about the need for complete rest. "David, you had a serious concussion. No work for at least a month. Your brain needs to recover fully." But it wasn't just the physical pain that bothered him. During the long hours of silence, forced to stay away from the offices of Tech Innovate, the company he had built from scratch and that now employed over 200 people, David couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved him, Sarah. The name echoed in his mind like a gentle melody. Her kind eyes, the way she had held his hand in the rain, murmuring words of comfort while they waited for the ambulance. There was a purity in that gesture that had touched him deeply, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You need to stop romanticizing the situation," Dr. Emily Carter, his therapist, would say during one of their weekly sessions in her elegant office in the Upper East Side. Emily was a 50-year-old woman, her grey hair always impeccably styled, who had been with him since his traumatic divorce 2 years ago. "I'm not romanticizing," David would reply, sitting in the leather armchair that already knew every curve. "I'm just impressed by her genuine kindness. When was the last time someone did something for me without expecting anything in return?" Emily, David observed over his reading glasses, jotting down notes in his notepad. "David, your difficulty in trusting people has intensified significantly since the divorce. It's natural for an act of kindness to impact you this way, but you need to be cautious not to project your emotional needs onto a stranger." The divorce. Just thinking about Veronica still caused a tightness in his chest. 15 years of marriage shattered when he discovered she was cheating on him with his best friend and business partner. The legal battle had been brutal, exposed in the media, with her trying to claim half of everything he had built. In the end, David kept the company, but lost faith in humanity and in himself. "Maybe that's exactly what I need," David murmured, looking out the office window at the frantic movement of Times Square. "Someone who doesn't know who I am, who doesn't want anything from me." It was a grey Tuesday when David finally returned to the office. The Tech Innovate building occupied 3 floors of a commercial skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, with its glass walls and minimalist design that he had chosen himself 5 years ago. The employees greeted him with respectful nods, some warmer than others, while others remained purely professional. David had always maintained a deliberate distance from his employees, a painful lesson learned after trusting too much in the former partner who betrayed him. He delegated almost all human resources decisions to Mark Thompson, his operations manager, a man he admired for his efficiency, even if he found him a bit too rigid. "David, it's great to see you back," Mark said, appearing in his office as soon as he settled behind the solid mahogany desk. "I hope you're fully recovered. I still feel some aches, but I'm fine. Bring me up to speed on everything that happened in the last 3 weeks. Mark pulled a thick folder from his black leather briefcase. "Everything is normal. We closed the contract with Petratech. September's numbers were 12% above expectations, and..." He hesitated slightly. We had to make some adjustments to the staff. What kind of adjustments? Terminations for cause. 3 employees who insisted on violating basic rules of punctuality and discipline. You've always said that discipline is fundamental to the success of any organization. David nodded, only half paying attention. His mind was still partially clouded by pain medications, and he trusted Mark's judgment on these administrative matters. The following days dragged on in a monotonous routine of meetings, reports, and decisions that seemed to lack the same importance as before. David often found himself looking out the window, thinking about the woman with kind eyes who had appeared in his life for just a few minutes but left a lasting mark. It was on a Friday, 2 weeks after his return, that everything changed. David was reviewing the monthly human resources reports, something he rarely did personally, but therapy had encouraged him to engage more with the human aspects of his company. Flipping through the pages filled with numbers and statistics, his eyes stopped at a specific section: terminations for cause, January 2024. 3 names were listed, along with the dates and reasons. The third name made his heart stop: Sarah Johnson, terminated on 01/15/2024 for unjustified tardiness. January 15th, the date of the accident. David felt the blood drain from his face. With trembling hands, he opened Sarah's complete file in the company system. There she was, in a small photo in the upper right corner of the document. The same kind eyes that had comforted him in the rain, the same face that appeared in his dreams. Administrative assistant, finance department. 2 years with the company. Exemplary employee, no previous absences or tardiness. Terminated for cause on 01/15/2024 at 9:30 a.m. after arriving 45 minutes late. David read and reread the document, feeling a growing nausea. Sarah had been terminated exactly on the day she saved him. The tardiness that cost her job was caused by helping him. "Mark!" David shouted, his voice echoing through the open office. "Mark, get in here, now!" Mark appeared within seconds, clearly startled by David's tone. "Yes, sir." "Is something wrong?" David turned the computer screen so Mark could see Sarah's file. "Explain this to me. Explain how you terminated an exemplary employee for cause over a single tardiness." Mark adjusted his glasses, examining the screen. His expression remained impassive, professional. "Ah, yes. Sarah Johnson. It was a difficult decision, but necessary. 45 minutes late, David. No acceptable justification. She claimed to have helped a man on the street, but that's not the responsibility of a company employee." "A man on the street," David repeated slowly, feeling the cruel irony of the situation. "And you thought that wasn't a sufficient justification?" "Of course not. Imagine if all employees started showing up late, using excuses about helping strangers. The company's discipline would go down the drain. You yourself have always said that I was the man on the street." David exploded, standing up from his chair so abruptly that it nearly toppled over. "She saved me, Mark. She stayed with me in the rain, called the ambulance, held my hand until the paramedics arrived. And you fired her for that." Mark paled, his mask of professional efficiency finally cracking. "David, I didn't know. How could I know? If you had told me, if I had told you." David rounded the desk, stopping just inches from Mark. "You terminated a woman for cause, Mark, for doing the right thing, for showing compassion, for saving a life. I'm so sorry, I truly am. But how could I have imagined that—" "Get out of my way," David said in a dangerously low voice. "Get out of my way before I do something I'll regret." Mark stepped back, clearly terrified. "David, we can fix this. We can call her back, offer her compensation." "Get out!" After Mark hurriedly left, David sank into his chair. In her chair, Sarah buried her head in her hands. The guilt she felt was overwhelming, physical, as if someone were squeezing her chest with force. Sarah had lost her job for saving him. But still, she had been terminated for cause, which meant she would be entitled to practically no benefits. David opened Sarah's file again, reading every detail. Single mother. Address in East Harlem. Salary of $2,800, a ridiculous amount for someone living in New York City with a child. How was she surviving without a job for 3 weeks? He picked up the phone and dialed Mrs. Johnson, the receptionist. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to get me the residential address of a former employee, Sarah Johnson, and I want it to be discreet. Of course, Mr. David. May I ask why? David hesitated. How to explain without sounding completely crazy? It's a personal matter. Very personal. While waiting for the information, David walked to the window of his office, gazing at the city stretching infinitely in all directions. Somewhere down below, Sarah was struggling to survive because of his kindness. Because of him. When Mrs. Johnson brought the address 20 minutes later, David had already made a decision. He didn't know exactly how, but he would correct this injustice. He would find Sarah and explain everything. Maybe he could offer her the job back. Maybe he could compensate her in some way. But as he looked at the address scribbled on the paper, 847 Palm Street, App 23, East Harlem, David realized he had no idea how a woman from the neighborhood would react to a millionaire showing up at her door, especially when that millionaire was, indirectly, the cause of all her problems. The rain began to fall again outside, and David remembered the texture of Sarah's hand, warm and comforting, guiding him through the darkness of his fragmented conscience. Now it was his turn to find a way to save her. The problem was that he had no idea how to do that, without looking like a crazy person, or worse, without hurting her even more. The 2-bedroom apartment in East Harlem had never seemed so small as during those 3 weeks of unemployment. Sarah woke up every morning at 6 a.m., not because she needed to go to work, but because the 8-year habit of being a single mother had created an inflexible biological clock. The problem was that after taking Lily to school, she returned to an emptiness that slowly consumed her. "Mom, why aren't you working anymore?" Lily had asked in the first week, her brown eyes filled with innocent curiosity that broke Sarah's heart. "Mommy is between jobs, sweetheart. Sometimes that happens to adults," Sarah replied, forcing a smile as she set the breakfast table. The French bread she used to buy at Mr. Smith's bakery was no longer an option. Now she bought sliced bread at the supermarket. Cheaper, but that lasted less and had less flavor. The kitchen table had become a financial battleground. Every night, after Lily fell asleep, Sarah spread the bills over the red checkered tablecloth that her mother had embroidered years ago. The worn black calculator was her only weapon against numbers that refused to add up. Rent $800, electricity $120, water $70, phone $40, supermarket. Sarah stopped at this point, mentally calculating how many times she could serve pasta with tomato sauce before Lily started complaining about the monotony. Her savings, which had never been substantial, melted away like ice in the sun. She had managed to save $2,000 over 2 years, an amount that seemed substantial when she had a job, but now proved insufficient for more than 2 months of basic expenses. "Sarah, are you okay?" asked Mrs. Johnson, her 67-year-old neighbor, when she found her in the hallway of the building one Thursday morning. Mrs. Johnson was a small, energetic woman with white hair always tied up in a bun and blue eyes that saw everything happening in the building. "I'm fine, Mrs. Johnson. Why?" "Because you look like you haven't been sleeping well. And last night I heard you crying." Sarah felt her face heat up. The walls of the old building were thin, and she tried to control her tears. But sometimes the pressure became unbearable. "I'm going through a tough time, but it will pass." Mrs. Johnson studied her with the experienced gaze of someone who had raised 5 children and buried a husband. "You lost your job, didn't you?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "My grandson needs private math lessons," Mrs. Johnson said after a moment. "I can't pay much, but if you accept $20 per lesson twice a week..." It was charity disguised as a favor, and they both knew it. But Sarah also knew that Mrs. Johnson was trying to help without hurting her pride. "I accept. Thank you." The private lessons with Kevin, a 12-year-old boy, became a double relief, $40 a week that helped stretch the budget and 2 hours in which Sarah could focus on something other than her worries. Kevin was a smart but inattentive boy, the child of parents who worked all day and left his education to his grandparents. "Aunt Sarah," he said during the second lesson, as they tried to solve proportion problems, "why do you seem sad?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "I'm not sad, Kevin, just worried about some things. My grandma said you lost your job. Is it really bad not to have a job?" Sarah stopped writing, the pencil hovering over the notebook. How to explain to a child the anguish of waking up every day, not knowing how she would pay the bills next month? How to describe the humiliation of having to decline an invitation to a friend's birthday because she had no money for either a gift or transportation? It's complicated, Kevin. When you grow up, you have to work to having money to buy food, pay for the house, those things. When you don't have a job, it gets tough. But you'll find another one, right? "I will," Sarah said, trying to convince herself as much as the boy. "Of course I will." But the reality was much harsher than her optimistic response suggested. Sarah had sent resumes to over 50 companies in the first 2 weeks. The responses, when they came, were always negative or silent. When she managed to get an interview, which happened only 3 times, she always faced the same obstacles. "I see here that you are a single mother," said the HR manager of a cosmetics company, a blonde woman in her 40s with perfectly painted red nails. "Do you have someone to take care of your daughter when she gets sick?" "I have a support network, yes," Sarah lied. In fact, since her mother had passed away 3 years ago, she had relied on the kindness of neighbors and the school administration for emergencies. "And what if we need overtime, weekends?" "I can manage, depending on the notice." The woman jotted something down on paper, her expression making it clear that the answer did not please her. "We'll review your profile and get back to you." Sarah knew they wouldn't reach out. It was always like this. In the second interview, at an accounting firm downtown, the questioning was even more direct. "Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you," said the manager, a balding man in his 50s with a prominent belly. "Single mothers tend to miss work more, leave early, have more personal problems that affect their job. It's a statistical reality. Sir, in 2 years at my previous company, I never missed work for personal reasons. I was never late, never, but you were fired for cause due to tardiness, right?" He interrupted, consulting a sheet of paper. "How do you explain that?" Sarah felt her blood boil. "It was an extraordinary situation. I helped someone who had an accident. "Look at that," he said, leaning back in his chair with a condescending smile. "You're already making excuses. It's exactly this kind of behavior that concerns us." Sarah left that interview wanting to scream. Outside, she stopped at a cafe, a luxury she could no longer afford, but she needed a few minutes to compose herself, and called Carla, her younger sister. "Carla, I need to vent to someone." "Hey, sis, what's wrong now?" Carla's voice sounded impatient, distracted. In the background, Sarah could hear the sound of the television and children's voices. "This job search is turning into a nightmare. People seem to think that being a single mother is synonymous with being a problematic employee." "Sarah," Carla sighed, "don't you think you're being a bit dramatic? Maybe the problem isn't just others, you know?" "What do you mean?" "You've always been very proud, sis. Since you were little. You never accept help from anyone, always want to do everything on your own. Maybe if you were more flexible with men, you wouldn't be in this situation." Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. "Flexible how, Carla?" "Oh, Sarah, don't play dumb. You're beautiful, smart. You could have remarried, had someone to share the responsibilities. But no, you prefer to play the independent warrior." "I prefer not to depend on any man after what Lily's father did to me," Sarah replied, trying to control her voice. "That was 8 years ago, Sarah. You can't stay hurt forever." Rodrigo was no good, but not every man is the same. Sarah hung up the phone without saying goodbye. Carla had been married for 10 years to a man who supported her and allowed her to stay home, taking care of their 3 children. It was easy to give advice about independence when you never had to worry about next month's rent. Lily, even at just 8 years old, began to notice the changes at home. She stopped asking for new toys, started eating everything on her plate without complaining, and began doing her homework without needing reminders. It was a forced maturity that broke Sarah's heart. "Mom," Lily said one night while Sarah helped her brush her teeth, "the teacher said that anyone who doesn't pay for the field trip by Friday won't be able to go." Sarah stopped brushing. The trip to the zoo cost $30, a ridiculous amount under normal circumstances, but now it represented 2 days' worth of lunch for the two of them. "How much is it again, sweetheart?" $30. "But if you don't have the money, it's okay. I can stay at school studying." The resignation in Lily's voice was like a knife. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, fighting back tears. "You're going on that trip, my love. Mommy will find a way." That night, Sarah counted and recounted the money she had left. $140 for the next 2 weeks. If she paid for the trip, there would be just over $100 left for food and transportation. But seeing Lily smile was more important than any bill. She was finishing setting the breakfast table the next morning when there was a knock at the door. Sarah frowned. It was only 8:30, too early for visitors. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a suit standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a leather briefcase. When she opened the door, it took her a few seconds to recognize him. The gray hair at his temples, the marked features, the eyes she had seen wounded and confused on that rainy morning. David, the man she had helped. "Sarah," he said, his voice uncertain. "I'm David Miller. You helped me a few weeks ago when I had a bike accident on 5th Avenue. Sarah felt the world spin slightly. How did you get my address?" David seemed to realize how that sounded disturbing. "I can explain everything. Please, it's very important that we talk. There's something you need to know about your termination." The mention of her termination made Sarah tense up. This smelled like a scam, some kind of scheme. Vulnerable women were easy targets for all sorts of tricks, type of opportunist. "I don't know what kind of scam this is," Sarah said, starting to close the door, "but I'm not interested." "Sarah, wait." David put his hand on the door, preventing her from closing it completely. "I own Tech Innovate. I'm the owner of the company where you worked." Sarah paused, processing the information. "You're lying." "I'm not." "And you were fired for helping me. Your supervisor didn't know I was the man from the accident." "I need to correct this injustice." Sarah studied him through the crack of the door. There was something sincere in his eyes, but also something that made her uncomfortable. This man had investigated her life, discovered where she lived, and showed up unannounced. No matter how genuine his intentions were, something felt deeply wrong about the situation. "I don't believe you," she said, closing the door in his face. On the other side, she heard him lightly knock on the door and say, "Sarah, please. I know it sounds crazy, but I can prove everything I'm saying. You don't deserve to be going through this." Sarah leaned against the door, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to believe, wanted it to be true, that her firing had been a terrible misunderstanding that could be corrected. But her life experience had taught her that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is a lie. After a few minutes, the footsteps in the hallway faded away. Sarah went to the window and saw David getting into a black Mercedes with a driver. Maybe he really was who he said he was. But that only made the situation even more frightening. What did a rich man want with a poor woman from the outskirts? And why couldn't she stop thinking about his eyes, so vulnerable that rainy morning, even behind all that apparent wealth? David returned to his apartment in Brooklyn with a feeling of failure he hadn't experienced since the early years of trying to establish his company. The meeting with Sarah had been a complete disaster. He looked like a millionaire stalker pursuing a vulnerable woman. Sitting in his living room with his designer furniture and panoramic view, David realized the social chasm that separated them. How did you expect her to react? It did ask Dr. Emily during the Tuesday session. A rich man shows up at the door of an unemployed woman, claiming to be responsible for her problems. It sounds like the beginning of a psychological thriller. David massaged his temples, still sensitive after the accident. But it's the truth, Emily. She lost her job for helping me. I need to fix this. And do you really need to? Or are you confusing guilt with something else? The question bothered him more than it should have. David had questioned his own motives during the sleepless nights that followed the failed meeting. There was something about Sarah that attracted him beyond guilt. Her genuine kindness, the quiet strength he perceived, even in the few minutes they spent together. But admitting that would mean admitting he was developing feelings for a woman who didn't even trust him. "It's guilt," he finally said. "Pure and simple." Emily made a note, her skepticism evident. "David, in 2 years of therapy, this is the first time I've seen you genuinely excited about something. It may be guilt, but there's something more." Back at the office, David locked himself in his office, ignoring Roberto's attempts to talk about the situation. Sarah Johnson's file was open on his desk, and he reread each document, looking for clues on how to approach her without seeming like a predator. It was then that he noticed a detail on the application form. Under personal references, Sarah had listed Father Michael Johnson, St. Francis of Assisi Church, East Harlem. A priest. Maybe there was a way to approach her through the church. The following Saturday, David drove his Porsche to East Harlem, a neighborhood he had never visited despite living in New York City for 40 years. The difference was shocking. The streets were narrower, the buildings older and tighter, the traffic more intense and chaotic. He parked near St. Francis of Assisi Church, a simple brick building with a modest tower. Father Michael was a man in his 60s, short and stocky, with graying hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He welcomed David in a small room at the back of the church, decorated only with a wooden crucifix and a photo of Pope Francis. "Mr. David," said the priest after hearing the whole story, "I understand your need to correct this injustice. But you need to understand that Sarah is like a daughter to me. I won't allow anyone to hurt her. Father, I have no intention of hurting her. I want to help her." Father Michael studied him in silence for a long moment. "Sarah told me about the firing. She is devastated, but also suspicious. Women in her situation are frequent targets for men with bad intentions." "I understand that. That's why I'm here, seeking your guidance. Sarah has always wanted to create an adult literacy project here in the community," the priest said slowly. "Lack of resources has always prevented that, perhaps. If someone financed this project..." David felt a spark of hope. "How much would be needed?" "To start, about $15,000. Educational materials, a suitable space, a few months of operation. Consider it done. But I want her to coordinate the project. And I want the offer to come from the church, not from me." Father Michael smiled for the first time in the conversation. "You are smarter than I imagined. But remember, if your intentions are not pure, you will have to deal with me." As David organized the strategy through the church, Sarah faced her own emotional battle. Lily had returned radiant from the field trip to the zoo, recounting details of every animal she saw, but her daughter's joy only intensified Sarah's guilt. The $30 for the trip had forced a week of rice with eggs and plain pasta. "Mom," Lily said one night, watching Sarah count coins, "are you okay?" "I am, love. Why do you ask? You keep counting money every night." "And you cry when you think I can't see?" Sarah stopped counting the coins, feeling her heart tighten. "Mommy is just a little worried about some adult things. But it will pass. Julia from my class said that when her mom was like this, it was because they didn't have money." "Is that it?" The brutal honesty of the question left Sarah speechless. "How do you protect a child from reality without lying to her?" "Sometimes adults go through tough times," Sarah said carefully. "But you don't need to worry about that. It's Mommy's job to figure it out. Can I help in any way?" Sarah hugged Lily, fighting back tears. "You already helped me by being the wonderful girl you are." It was in that moment of vulnerability that Jessica chose to make one of her unexpected visits. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carrying expensive shopping bags and wearing clothes that cost more than Sarah's monthly budget. "Wow, sis," Jessica said, looking around the small apartment. "The situation is worse than I imagined." "Thanks for your sensitivity, Jessica." "I'm not being insensitive. I'm being realistic." Jessica sat on the couch, crossing her legs. Her nails were perfectly done, her hair freshly cut at an expensive salon. "You can't keep being this stubborn." "What stubbornness?" This refusal to accept help. Michael, referring to her husband, said he could get you a position at his company. Of course, it would be a more modest position than you're used to, but it's better than nothing. Sarah knew the kind of modest position her brother-in-law would offer, something that would make her dependency and inferiority clear. Thanks, but I'd rather find something on my own. Jessica rolled her eyes. Sarah, for God's sake, you have a daughter to support. It's not the time for pride. It's not pride, Jessica. It's dignity. Dignity doesn't pay bills, sister. Jessica opened her expensive purse and pulled out an envelope. I brought $500 for you. I know it's not much, but I can't accept it. Why not? Because you'll throw it in my face later. Just like you did when you lent money for Lily's college tuition. Jessica turned red. I never threw anything in your face. Good thing I helped you, or where would you be? Sarah mimicked her sister's voice. You should be more grateful. That's not how you treat family that helps. You were reminding me of my dependency, just like you're doing now. The argument was interrupted by Lily's arrival from school. The girl greeted her aunt politely, but Sarah noticed how her eyes were fixed on the expensive shopping bags. Aunt Jessica brought gifts? Lily asked with the typical innocence of her age. Jessica looked at Sarah, a cruel smile on her lips. I brought money for your mom, but she doesn't want to accept it. Jessica, Sarah said sharply. Why not, Mom? Lily asked, confused. Because sometimes accepting help comes with a very high price, Sarah replied, looking directly at Jessica. After her sister left, Sarah felt even more isolated. The attempt to manipulate through Lily had been cruel but effective. Now the girl would question why they lived with so little when family could help. It was the following Sunday, during Mass at St. Francis of Assisi Church, that Father Michael made an announcement that would change everything. Brothers and sisters, he said from the pulpit, our community has received a blessing. An anonymous benefactor has donated resources for us to create an adult literacy project. We are looking for someone from our community to coordinate this project. Sarah felt her heart race. It was exactly the kind of job she had always dreamed of, using her education to help others, working with a purpose beyond mere survival. After Mass, she approached the priest. Father Michael, about the literacy project. Oh, Sarah, he smiled. I was hoping you would show interest. I know it's something you've always wanted to do, but Father, I don't have formal experience in education. You have something better. You have heart. And you have the experience of having studied at night while raising Lily. You know the challenges these adults will face. What would the salary be? Sarah asked, trying not to sound desperate. $2,500 to start. If the project goes well, we can increase it. Sarah felt tears of relief burning her eyes. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to cover basic bills while she looked for something better. When can I start? Next week. But Sarah, the priest held her arm, I want you to know that this benefactor has one condition. They want to closely monitor the project's development. They won't interfere with your work, but they would like to be present at the planning meetings. Who are they? Father Michael hesitated. Someone who understands the importance of education. Someone who believes in your potential. Sarah nodded, too excited to question the mysteries. Finally, a light at the end of the tunnel. A job that made sense, that had purpose, that could grow. She had no idea that the anonymous benefactor had been sitting in the back pew throughout the Mass, watching her reaction and wondering how to reveal their identity without destroying the fragile trust that was being built. David left the church with mixed feelings. The plan was working, but the guilt of not being completely honest gnawed at him. Sarah deserved the truth, but the truth could ruin everything before it even began. The following week would be crucial. If he could prove his good intentions through the work, maybe he could find a way to reveal who he really was. But first, he needed to make sure that his own feelings weren't clouding his judgment. Because with each passing day, David realized that what he felt for Sarah went far beyond guilt or gratitude, and that was both thrilling and terrifying. The first planning meeting for the literacy project was scheduled for a Thursday at 7 p.m. in the parish hall. Marina arrived 15 minutes early, carrying an improvised folder filled with scribbled notes on various pieces of paper. Her ideas for the project she had kept in her dreams for years. The parish hall was a simple space, with light green walls peeling in some corners, white plastic chairs stacked against the walls, and a wooden crucifix hanging over a small table that would serve as a desk. The smell of brewed coffee, mixed with the aroma of candle wax, created a cozy atmosphere that Marina had always associated with possibilities. "Marina, you arrived early," said Father Michael, entering the hall with a tray containing a thermos and some mismatched cups. "Nervous?" "A little," she admitted, arranging her notes on the table. "It's been a long time since I've had an opportunity like this. You deserve it, my daughter. I've always seen your potential, even when you doubted it yourself." Marina smiled, remembering the conversations she had had with the priest. During the toughest moments of her solitary journey with Lily, he had been one of the few who never judged her for the choices she made or the circumstances she faced. "Father, about this benefactor," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. "It must be him arriving," the priest said, with an expression that Marina couldn't interpret, a mix of nervousness and expectation. The door opened, and Marina felt the world stop. David Miller entered the hall, wearing a simpler suit than the first time she saw him, but still clearly expensive. His eyes met hers immediately, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Good evening," David said, his voice hesitant. "Marina." "You!" she whispered, standing up from her chair so abruptly that she almost toppled it over. "Are you the benefactor?" Father Michael positioned himself between them, his hands raised in a conciliatory gesture. "Marina, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Marina's voice rose an octave, echoing off the walls of the hall. "That you all set this up?" "That it was all a charade." "It wasn't a charade," David said, stepping forward. "The project is real, your qualifications are real, the community's needs are real, but your identity isn't." Marina pointed at him, her hands trembling with anger and humiliation. "You lied to me." "I never lied about who I am. I said I own Tech Innovate. I said you were fired for helping me. All true. But you didn't say you were funding this project to manipulate me." "It's not manipulation," David said, his own voice rising. "It's justice. You lost your job for saving me. I have the right to try to make it right." "Right?" Marina laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "You think you have a right over my life? That you can decide how to make it right?" Father Michael clapped his hands, the sound echoing sharply in the hall. "Stop, both of you! Sit down, and let's talk like civilized people." Marina remained standing, arms crossed, alternating her gaze between David and the priest. "Father Michael, did you know from the beginning who he was?" "I did," the priest admitted. "And I accept responsibility for that." "But Marina, this man has no ulterior motives. How can you be sure?" Marina turned to David. "What do you want from me? What is your real objective?" David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Marina recognized from the morning of the accident, pure nervousness. I want to correct an injustice. I want you to have the opportunity you lost because of me. And then, what happens after your conscience is clear?" The question caught David off guard. He had focused so much on finding a way to help her that he hadn't really thought about the after. After? "I don't know. After you go on with your life, with a job that exists only because you feel guilty, the job will exist regardless of my guilt. The community needs it. You have the capability. My initial motivation doesn't invalidate that." Marina slowly sat down, processing his words. "And if I say no? If I walk out now and never accept anything from you again? Then the project continues with someone else," David said without hesitation. "I won't force you into anything." The honesty of the answer surprised her. Marina expected manipulation, emotional blackmail, something that would confirm her suspicions about his motives. But there was a raw sincerity in his voice that made her question her own certainties. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Really, why do you care?" David sat in the opposite chair, keeping a respectful distance. Because when you helped me that morning, It was the first time in a long time that someone showed genuine kindness to me, wanting nothing in return, not knowing who I was, and finding out that you were punished for it. I can't accept that. You investigated me, Marina said, not as an accusation but as a statement. You found out where I live, where I work. Worked, David corrected. And yes, I investigated. It was wrong, I know. But I was desperate to find you. Father Michael served coffee in the mismatched cups, the domestic ritual easing some of the tension in the air. Marina, he said gently, you've always wanted to make a difference in adult education. This is your chance. A chance tainted from the start, she murmured. All chances are tainted in some way, David said. The question is whether you can create something pure from the contamination. Marina looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he entered the hall. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands moved nervously over the table. This was not the confident businessman she had imagined, but a man clearly tormented by something. Tell me about yourself, she said suddenly. If we're going to work together, I want to know who I'm dealing with. David seemed surprised by the change in direction. What do you want to know? Everything. Why are you alone? Why do you seem so lost? Marina, Father Michael warned gently, maybe that's too personal. Not. David raised his hand. She has the right to know. He took a deep breath. I've been divorced for 2 years. A 15-year marriage that ended when I discovered my ex-wife was cheating on me with my best friend and business partner. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a reluctant empathy. I'm sorry. It was devastating. Not just the betrayal, but realizing that 2 people I trusted most in the world had been deceiving me for years. Since then, I've struggled to trust anyone. And yet you want to help a stranger? David smiled, but it was a sad smile. Maybe that's exactly why. You didn't know me. You didn't know what you could gain by helping me. It was pure. The silence stretched for a few minutes, only broken by the distant noise of traffic outside. Sarah battled her own nature, the part of her that always suspected motives, that always expected the worst from people, especially powerful men. If I agree, she finally said, I have conditions. David straightened in his chair. What are they? First, total transparency. No more investigations, no more surprises, no more lies by omission. I accept. Second, this project is mine. You can fund it, you can oversee it, but the educational decisions are mine. I accept. Third, when the project is running, when the community no longer needs your money, you step back. No drama, no demands. David hesitated at this. And what if? What if by then we find out we work well together? A bridge we'll cross when we get to it, Sarah replied, but something in her voice softened slightly. So we have a deal? David asked, extending his hand. Sarah looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment. It was a decision that could change her life for better or worse. She thought of Lily, of the mounting bills, of the humiliating interviews she had faced. She also thought of the vulnerable man who had held her hand in the rain so different from the powerful businessman sitting in front of her now. She extended her hand and shook his. We have a deal. The handshake lasted a little longer than necessary, and both felt the electricity of the contact. There was something there, a connection that went beyond guilt and gratitude, something they both recognized but weren't ready to name. Well, said Father Michael, smiling for the first time that night, now that we've settled this, how about we start planning how we're going to transform lives through education? For the rest of the night, they worked together, their personalities surprisingly complementing each other. Sarah brought passion and practical knowledge of the community's needs, while David brought business perspective and resources. Father Michael mediated when their different approaches created tension. We need at least 20 students for the first class, Sarah explained, scribbling numbers on a piece of paper. Adults who work during the day, so classes would have to be in the evening. How many times a week? David asked. Twice would be ideal. More than that is too heavy for those who work. Less doesn't provide adequate continuity, David was calculating on an expensive laptop. 20 students twice a week teaching materials. How much are we talking about per month? About $3,000 including everything, Sarah replied. That's less than I spend on wine in a month, David murmured, not thinking. Sarah stared at him. It must be nice to have that kind of problem. David blushed, realizing how the comment sounded insensitive. I'm sorry. Sometimes I forget that you live in a different world than ours. Sarah completed. It's good to remember. It will help you understand your students. Our students, David corrected. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the correction. Our students, she repeated, and for the first time that night smiled genuinely at him. When they said goodbye at the church door, it was already past 10 p.m. The night was clear, and the stars were visible despite the city's light pollution. Sarah, David said as she was walking away, thank you for giving me a chance. Don't thank me yet, she replied, turning to face him. Prove that you deserve it. David watched her walk to the bus stop, her silhouette outlined against the streetlights. There was something determined in her steps, a strength that he admired and feared at the same time. On the bus ride home, Sarah rested her head against the window, watching the city pass by. She didn't know if she had made the right decision, but for the first time in weeks she felt hope, and something more, a curiosity about the complex man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. They both went to bed that night with mixed feelings of anticipation and apprehension, unaware that they were embarking on a journey that would test not only their ability to work together, but also their capacity to trust, forgive, and eventually love. The first week of work on the literacy project brought revelations neither of them expected. Sarah arrived every morning at 8 a.m. at the community center, which was being renovated to become a proper classroom. David showed up promptly at 9 a.m., carrying coffees from an upscale bakery in downtown, a gesture that initially irritated Sarah. You don't need to bring coffee for me, she said on the second morning, refusing the paper cup with the bakery's golden logo. It's just coffee, Sarah. I'm not trying to buy your favor. It's not about buying, she replied, continuing to organize donated school supplies. It's about understanding that $15 coffee is more than many people here spend on lunch. David stopped, holding both cups. How much do you think this coffee costs? By the smell and the packaging, about $15–20. It costs $8. It's not gourmet coffee. It's from the bakery around the corner from my building. But you assumed it was expensive because it came from me. Sarah felt her face heat up. She had indeed assumed, based on her prejudices about wealthy people. I'm sorry. It's just that you expect me to be a disconnected snob, David completed without bitterness. It's understandable, but maybe we can work without these assumptions from both sides. From that day on, they developed a routine. Sarah organized the educational aspects, while David took care of logistics and finances. They discovered they worked well together. She was detail-oriented and empathetic, while he was efficient and practical. We need to promote the registrations, Sarah said on Wednesday, spreading handwritten flyers across the table. I made these flyers, but I'm not sure if... David examined the papers. Sarah's handwriting was clear and beautiful, but the design was amateurish. Can I suggest some improvements to the layout? Without changing your text, just reorganizing it to grab more attention. Sarah hesitated. Won't it be too sophisticated for the audience? Trust me, elegance doesn't mean inaccessibility. David spent the afternoon working on his laptop, creating a professional version of Sarah's flyers. He maintained the simple and welcoming language she had chosen, but with a layout that highlighted the important information. When he showed the result, Sarah was impressed. It's perfect, she admitted. How did you learn to do this? I started my company from scratch. In the early years, I did everything myself, from programming to marketing materials. What was your life like before you got rich? Sarah asked, surprised by her own curiosity. David smiled, a nostalgic expression crossing his face. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Chinatown, sharing it with a college roommate. I worked 16 hours a day, ate ramen, and dreamed of having my own business. What changed? Everything. And nothing. David leaned back in the plastic chair. The money came, comfort came, but loneliness came too. When you have a lot to lose, it becomes harder to trust people. Sarah absorbed the information in silence. There was a melancholy in David that she was beginning to recognize. The loneliness of someone who had achieved everything materially but lost genuine human connections. "And you?" he asked. "What was your life like before all of this?" Sarah felt the familiar impulse to shut down, to not share anything personal. But something in the vulnerability David had shown made her want to reciprocate. "It was chaotic," she said. "Lily was born when I was 24. Her father disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. I had to drop out of college in my last year, work during the day, and study at night to finish my technical degree. That must have been very difficult." It was, but it was also liberating in a way. I discovered I was stronger than I thought, that I could take care of another person, completely dependent on me. "Lily is lucky to have you as her mother." Sarah smiled, the first time she genuinely smiled at him. "Thank you. She is everything to me." This conversation marked a subtle shift in their dynamic. They still maintained professional distance, but there was now a growing mutual understanding. David began to understand the strength Sarah had to develop to survive alone, and Sarah started to see beyond the wealth, recognizing the loneliness and vulnerability that David hid. However, not everything was harmony. On Friday, during the first meeting with potential students, the first serious conflict arose. 15 people showed up at the community center. Construction workers, housekeepers, street vendors, retirees, all with life stories interrupted by a lack of formal education, dreaming of better opportunities. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah began, nervous but determined. "I'm Sarah, and I will coordinate the literacy classes. This is David, who is helping to fund the project." Mrs. Smith, a 58-year-old woman who worked as a housekeeper, raised her hand. "Miss, can I ask a question? How much will it cost?" "It won't cost anything," Sarah replied. "The materials are free, the classes are free. And after?" asked John, a 42-year-old construction worker. "When you get tired of playing school, will we be left hanging?" Sarah felt her blood boil. "No one is playing here, Mr. John. Not to be rude, miss. But I've seen many social projects start with a party and end up as nothing. Rich people get tired of helping the poor quickly." David felt all eyes turn to him. The tension in the room was palpable. "John," he said, standing up, "I can understand your distrust, but I want to assure you that this project will continue. We are setting up a fund that will ensure at least 2 years of operation." 2 years, John repeated. "And then?" "After that, if the project is running well, the community itself can sustain it. Or other supporters will come forward. Or we will find other forms of sustainability." Sarah admired David's patience, but also noticed he was being evasive. After the meeting, when they were alone, she confronted him. "You didn't really answer his question." "I did. I said the project will continue. You said they would find other forms of sustainability." "What forms?" David hesitated. "I don't know exactly yet. Maybe partnerships with other companies, maybe public resources." "David." Sarah stopped putting away the chairs and looked at him. "Did you plan how this will work in the long term?" Not completely. I was focused on starting first." Sarah felt a familiar sense of panic. So John might be right. This could end up as nothing. "No!" David replied quickly. "I won't let that happen. I promise." "How can you promise something you don't know if you can fulfill?" The question hung in the air between them. David realized that in his urgency to help Sarah, he had underestimated the complexity of creating something sustainable. It wasn't just a matter of money, but of real commitment to the community. "You're right," he admitted. "I need to think this through better." Sarah sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility. "David, these people are going to trust us. They will reorganize their lives, create expectations. If we fail, we won't fail," David said with a determination that surprised them both. "I will make it work. I don't know how yet, but I will." That night, Sarah arrived home physically and emotionally exhausted. Lily was waiting for her in the living room, doing homework at the dining table. "Mom, how was the new job?" Sarah sat next to her daughter, watching the math lesson. "Complicated, sweetheart. Working with people is always complicated, but do you like it?" Sarah thought about the question. Despite the conflicts and uncertainties, there was something deeply satisfying in. Sarah was creating something that could change lives. "I do like it, then it will work," said Lily with the absolute confidence that only children can have. Sarah kissed her daughter's head, wishing she had the same certainty. But while helping Lily with her homework, she couldn't stop thinking about the expression on David's face when he promised he wouldn't fail. There was something desperate in that promise, as if he needed the project to succeed as much as she did. On the other side of the city, David was working late in his apartment, researching sustainability models for social projects, looking for ways to ensure that his promise could be fulfilled. For the first time in years, something in his life seemed more important than profits and business growth. But while planning spreadsheets and timelines, David couldn't shake the image of disappointment in Sarah's eyes when she questioned his empty promises. He desperately wanted to prove he was different from the men who had let her down before, but he was beginning to realize that it would require much more than money and good intentions. The following week would be crucial. Classes would start on Monday, and both Sarah and David knew they were embarking on something that could either bring them closer together or completely destroy the fragile trust they had built. Neither of them imagined that other obstacles were about to arise, coming from both David's past and the insecurities that Sarah still carried about her own ability to trust again. The first week of classes went better than Sarah had expected. 12 adults regularly attended on Tuesdays and Thursdays, showing a hunger for learning that deeply touched her. Mrs. Smith, despite her initial distrust, turned out to be a dedicated student, always arriving 15 minutes early. John, the skeptical construction worker, surprised everyone with his ease with numbers and logic. "Teacher Sarah," he said after the third class, using the title with genuine respect, "how long does it take for someone to learn to read properly?" "It depends on the person, John. Some can read simple texts in 6 months. Others need more time. My daughter is in 5th grade. I want to be able to help her with her homework." The vulnerability in the rough man's voice touched Sarah. "You will succeed, John. I'm sure of it." David watched these interactions from the corner of the room, where he had set up a small desk to work while the classes were happening. Initially, Sarah questioned his constant presence, but he argued that he needed to understand the project in order to expand it in the future. The truth, which he didn't admit even to himself, was that he enjoyed watching Sarah teach. There was something mesmerizing about how she transformed in the classroom. The nervous and distrustful woman he had known became confident, patient, and inspiring. Her eyes sparkled when a student managed to form their first complete word. Her hands animatedly gestured when she explained basic math concepts. "You are falling for her," Dr. Emily said during the Thursday session. David nearly choked on his coffee. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm helping to correct an injustice. David, in 10 years of therapy, this is the first time you've talked about a woman with such enthusiasm. You describe every gesture of hers, every word, every expression. I'm just impressed by her dedication to the project." Emily watched him over her glasses. "And her? Does she show any interest in you?" "No," David replied quickly. "She barely trusts me as a work partner, and even if she did, it would be inappropriate. She's vulnerable, needing the work." "Ah, so you've already thought about the possibility." David fell silent, realizing he had fallen into the therapist's trap. The truth was, yes, he had thought about it. More than he should have. More than was prudent. But Sarah had made her conditions clear from the beginning. When the project no longer needed him, he would step away. It was a constant reminder that any feelings he might develop had an expiration date. While David dealt with his emotional issues in therapy, Sarah faced sabotage at home. Jessica had become a constant presence, showing up at the apartment unannounced, always with venomous comments about Sarah's new situation. "Sister, are you sure this man doesn't have ulterior motives?" Jessica asked one Friday afternoon, sitting on the small sofa in the living room while watching Sarah prepare materials for the upcoming classes. What kind of ulterior motives? Sarah, for God's sake, a rich divorced man shows up out of nowhere wanting to help you. Wake up! It's not out of nowhere. I helped him when he had an accident, and now he wants to help you back. Jessica made air quotes. Men like him don't do anything for free, especially for women like you. Women like me. Beautiful, alone, vulnerable. You're the perfect type to be a bored man's fun. Sarah stopped organizing the papers, feeling the familiar anger rise in her chest. Jessica, it's not about that. It's about work, about education, about making a difference. You've always been too naive, sis. You think everyone has good intentions like you, and you've always been too cynical. You think everyone has bad motives. Jessica stood up, pacing the small room. I'm not cynical, I'm realistic. And the reality is that men like David Miller don't genuinely care about women like Sarah Johnson. Unless it's for one thing. That's ridiculous. Our relationship is strictly professional. Jessica laughed, a cruel sound. Sis, you're working at night in a community center in the outskirts. Why does he need to be there? Why doesn't a man who runs a company just transfer the money and let you run the project alone? The question hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach because it echoed her own secret doubts. Why did David insist on following everything so closely? Why did he seem genuinely interested in every detail of the project, in every student's progress? Because he wants to make sure the investment is being well spent, Sarah replied, but her voice sounded uncertain even to herself. Sure, Jessica said sarcastically. And I'm Giselle Bündchen. After Jessica left, Sarah felt restless for the rest of the night. Her sister's words had planted seeds of doubt that she tried to ignore, but they grew with every moment of silence. In the following Tuesday class, she found herself watching David more closely, looking for signs that Jessica might be right. David, in turn, immediately noticed the change in Sarah's behavior. She was more formal, more distant, avoiding conversations that weren't strictly about the project. Sarah, he said after class, when they were alone tidying up the room, is something wrong? You seem different. Different how? More defensive, like I did something wrong. Sarah hesitated, part of her wanting to confront him directly, part wanting to keep the professional peace. David, can I ask you a personal question? Sure. Why do you come to all the classes? Why not just fund the project and let me handle it alone? The question caught David off guard. How could he explain that he enjoyed being there, that he felt more alive in that simple classroom than in his luxurious office? How could he admit that her presence had become necessary for his well-being? I want to make sure everything is running smoothly, he said, repeating the same answer Sarah had given Jessica. But you don't need to be here for that. You could receive reports, look at spreadsheets. You don't want me to come? David asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Sarah hesitate. It's not that. It's just that people are talking. What people? Talking about what? Sarah sighed. My sister thinks you have other interests. Beyond the project. David felt his blood heat. Other interests? What kind of other interests? You know what kind. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. David fought the impulse to vehemently deny it, because how could he deny something that, in a way, was true? He was interested in Sarah, not just professionally, not just out of guilt, but there was a difference between interest and exploitation. Sarah, he finally said, I can assure you that my intentions are honorable. I'm not here to take advantage of you in any way. Then why are you here? Really? David looked at her, struggling between honesty and self-preservation. Because I feel useful here. Because I haven't done something that really matters in a long time. Because... He hesitated. Because I like the person I am when I'm here. The raw honesty of the answer disarmed Sarah. It wasn't what she expected to hear. It was neither denial nor admission of romantic interest. It was something more complex, more real. And what about me? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Do you feel anything about me? David studied her for a long moment, seeing the vulnerability behind the question. I feel admiration, he said carefully. I feel gratitude. I feel connection. But Sarah, even if I felt more than that, I wouldn't act on those feelings. You made it clear that our partnership is temporary and professional. And what if it weren't temporary? What if I changed my mind about that? The question surprised them both. Sarah hadn't planned to ask it, but the words came out before she could censor them. David felt his heart race. Are you changing your mind? I don't know. I'm confused. My sister plants these doubts in my head. But when I'm here with you, when I see how you interact with the students, how you really care, it doesn't seem to be about ulterior motives. It's not, David said firmly. Sarah, I swear to you that I would never do anything to harm you or put you in an uncomfortable situation. If at any point you feel that I'm being inappropriate, I don't feel that, Sarah interrupted. It's the opposite. Sometimes I feel like you're too good to be true. And that scares me. Why does it scare you? Because every time I've trusted someone who was too good to be true, I've been disappointed. And because, she hesitated, because sometimes I find myself wondering what it would be like if we were just two normal people, without all this complicated history between us. David took a step toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. We are two normal people, Sarah, with complicated histories, with fears, with hopes. The rest are just circumstances. Circumstances that include you being my boss, in a way. Circumstances that include me needing this job to survive. So what do you want to do? Do you want me to step back? Sarah looked him in the eyes, seeing the sincerity and fear he was trying to hide. No, she said softly. I don't want you to step back, but I need you to be patient with me. I need time to understand what I'm feeling without the pressure of others' opinions. I can be patient, David promised. I can be whatever you need me to be. It was a dangerous promise. They both knew that. But in that moment, in the silence of the community center, with the scent of coffee and chalk in the air, it felt like the only right thing to say. What neither of them knew was that outside, someone had been watching the entire conversation through the window. And that person was already planning how to use that information to destroy what was blossoming between them. David's past was about to resurface in a devastating way, and Sarah would have to decide if she trusted him enough to face the approaching storm. 3 weeks after the conversation in the community center, Sarah had found a delicate balance between her growing feelings for David and the need to maintain professional distance. The literacy classes were thriving. 15 students attended regularly, and the first results were encouraging. Mrs. Smith could already read newspaper headlines, and John had surprised everyone by writing a letter to his daughter. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything changed. Sarah was organizing the class materials when she heard high heels echoing in the hallway. The church. It wasn't a common sound in that environment, and she looked up, curious. The woman who appeared at the door of the community center was everything Sarah had imagined would be the opposite of herself. Tall, slender, with perfectly styled blonde hair cascading in waves over her shoulders. She wore a camel trench coat that cost more than Sarah's annual salary, and her red nails were flawless. She had the kind of polished beauty that only money can buy or maintain. You must be Sarah, the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice had a slight accent that Sarah couldn't identify, perhaps from Brazil, maybe acquired from travels abroad. Yes, that's me. How can I help you? I'm Veronica Miller, ex-Miller technically. The woman entered the community center as if she owned the place, her eyes scanning every detail with an expression that mixed curiosity and disdain. David's ex-wife. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Oh, I know you must be wondering what I'm doing here. Veronica approached the table where Sarah was organizing teaching materials, picking up a literacy workbook and flipping through it disinterestedly. It's touching, really. David always had this tendency towards charity projects. We're not a charity project, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Aren't we? Veronica raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. An unemployed woman from the outskirts, a social project funded by my ex-husband. How would you classify that? Sarah felt her face heat up. As a job, as education, as something that makes a difference in people's lives? Of course it does. Veronica placed the workbook back on the table with exaggerated care. Especially in your life, I imagine. It must be very convenient to have found such a generous benefactor. Mrs. Miller, Veronica, please. After all, we're almost friends, aren't we? We share the same interest in David. The comment was like a slap. Sarah straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to maintain her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, Sarah. Veronica laughed, a melodious and cruel sound. Can I call you Sarah? Do you really think I wouldn't do my research before coming here? I know exactly what's going on, and what is going on, in your opinion. Veronica sat down in one of the plastic chairs, crossing her legs with studied elegance. My ex-husband, a man traumatized by our divorce, finds a vulnerable woman who helped him in a moment of weakness. He convinces himself it's guilt, when in reality it's emotional neediness. She convinces herself it's love, when in fact it's opportunism. You don't know me to make that kind of judgment. I know the type, Veronica said casually. Women who see rich men as salvation. I don't blame them, really. It's understandable. Sarah took a deep breath, fighting the urge to scream or cry. Why are you here, Veronica? What do you want? I want to save you two from a terrible mistake. Veronica opened her Hermes bag and took out a manila envelope. David is a complex man, Sarah, generous but also obsessive. When he fixates on something or someone, he can become intense. What are you talking about? Do you know he investigated you before showing up at your door? Veronica placed the envelope on the table. He has photos of you, your daughter, information about your habits, your schedules. Sarah felt her blood run cold. That's not true. It's all there. A complete report from the private investigator he hired. David knows where you shop, what time you take your daughter to school, what your financial struggles are. He knows details about your life that you wouldn't imagine anyone would know. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. The first pages were typewritten reports with information about her routine, her finances, even speculations about her love life. There were photos of her leaving the apartment, walking with Lily, waiting at the bus stop. This is stalking, Sarah whispered. It's obsession, Veronica corrected. David did the same thing to me in the last months of our marriage. When he suspected infidelity, he followed me, investigated every move I made. That's how he found out about the affair. Sarah flipped through more pages, feeling a growing nausea. There was information about her neighbors, about Lily's school, even about Father Michael. Why are you showing me this? Because I know what it's like to be the object of David's fixation. It can start as gratitude, but it evolves into something much more disturbing. He will want to control your life, Sarah. He will want to be your savior, your provider, your only source of security. And you're doing this out of unkindness. Veronica laughed again. I'm doing this because I still love my ex-husband, despite everything. And because I know that this fantasy you two are building will destroy you both. David can't love normally, Sarah. He needs to be needed, indispensable. It's like a drug for him. Sarah closed the envelope, her hands trembling. What do you want from me? To end this before it becomes more complicated. To accept a sum of money. Enough for you and your daughter to move away, start over somewhere else. Away from David. Are you trying to buy me off? I'm trying to save you. And him too. Veronica stood up, smoothing her coat. Think about what I said, Sarah. Research David's past. Find out how he treated the pretty employees at the company before me. Discover why our marriage really ended. I thought it was because you cheated on him. Veronica stopped at the door, her smile turning into something darker. I did cheat on him, yes. But have you ever wondered why? Why would a woman cheat on a rich, successful, seemingly perfect man? Sarah didn't answer, but her expression showed reluctant curiosity. David is possessive, Sarah, controlling. At first it seems like protection, care. But gradually it turns into a prison. Veronica turned completely, leaning against the doorframe. He chose my clothes, decided who I could go out with, monitored my calls. always with the excuse that he loved me too much. She wanted to protect me. That doesn't justify betrayal. It doesn't justify it, but it explains it. When you feel suffocated, you search for air wherever you can find it. Veronica sighed. Ryan was just freedom. Someone who saw me as a person, not as an object to possess. Sarah absorbed the information in silence. Part of her wanted to dismiss it all as manipulation from a bitter ex-wife. But the photos in the envelope, the detailed reports about her life, it was too real to ignore. "Think about what I said," Veronica repeated, walking toward the exit. "And remember, men like David don't change. They just find new ways to exert control." After Veronica left, Sarah was alone in the community center, the envelope in her hands, feeling as heavy as lead. When David arrived 20 minutes later, bringing the usual coffee and smiling at seeing her, Sarah felt a mix of anger and confusion that left her almost nauseated. "Aye," he said, immediately noticing something was wrong. "Is something wrong?" Sarah lifted the envelope. "Your ex-wife was here." The smile vanished from David's face as if it had been erased. "Veronica, what did she want?" "To show me this." Sarah threw the envelope onto the table. "Care to explain why you have a complete dossier on my life?" David paled, recognizing the envelope. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you? Then explain why you investigated me as if I were a criminal. Explain why you have photos of me and my daughter. Explain why you know details about my life that I never told you. I was trying to understand how to help you in the best way." "Liar." Sarah stood up, walking to the window to distance herself from him. "This," she pointed to the envelope, "is not about help. It's about control. It's about power." David felt the world crumble around him. He had imagined 1,000 ways Veronica might try to sabotage his life, but he never thought she would use his own actions against him. "Sarah, I know it looks bad, but you need to understand the context. What context justifies stalking?" "It wasn't stalking. I was desperate to find you, to correct the injustice that had been done. I wanted to make sure that any help I offered was appropriate, necessary. Photographing my daughter, investigating my neighbors." Sarah turned to face him, tears of anger shining in her eyes. "David, this is sick." "I know it was excessive. I know it was wrong. But Sarah, you need to understand that I would never, ever use this information to hurt you." "How can I be sure of that? How can I trust you after discovering you've lied to me from day one?" David took a step toward her, stopping when Sarah backed away. "I didn't lie. I never lied about my feelings, about my intentions, your intentions to control me, to turn me into another one of your projects. That's not it. Sarah, you know that's not it. You saw how I am with the students, how I am with you. I don't know anything about you anymore," Sarah shouted, her voice echoing off the walls of the community center. "I thought I knew you, thought you were different, but you're just like all the other men who have come into my life. You want to control, you want to dominate, you want me to be dependent on you." David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Sarah, that's not true. You know that's not true." "Do I? How can I know? You investigated me for weeks before showing up at my door. What else have you hidden from me? What other surprises might your ex-wife bring?" Silence stretched between them, heavy with pain and disillusionment. David struggled to find words that could repair the damage, but he knew he had crossed a line that might be impossible to recross. "What else did Veronica say?" he finally asked. "That you're possessive, controlling. That's why she cheated on you." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past mistakes. "And do you believe her?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." Sarah sat heavily in a chair. "But I know I can't keep working with someone I don't trust." "Sarah, please." "No." She raised her hand, interrupting him. "It's over, David. The project, our partnership, everything. It's over. And the students? And the project we've worked so hard to build. We'll find another way. But not with you." David felt his world completely collapse. In just a few weeks, he had found purpose, connection, maybe even love. And now he was losing it all because of decisions he had made in moments of desperation and vulnerability. "Sarah," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I know I made mistakes. I know I violated your privacy in an unacceptable way, but you have to believe that I never wanted to hurt you." "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," Sarah replied, not looking at him. "Go away, David, and don't come back." David stood still for a long moment, wanting to say more, wanting to fight for her trust. But he recognized the determination in her voice, the way her shoulders stiffened. It was the same determination that had sustained her as a single mother, that had led her to help him in the rain, even at the risk of being late for work. "I will transfer the necessary funds to keep the project running for 2 years, he finally said. "Directly to the church's account. You won't have to deal with me for anything." Sarah didn't respond. And Sarah, "I'm so sorry, truly." After he left, Sarah remained alone in the community center for over an hour, crying tears that mixed anger, disillusionment, and a pain she didn't want to admit. She had begun to believe that David was different, that maybe she could trust again. The discovery that he had invaded her privacy so systematically was more than a betrayal of trust. It was a confirmation of her worst fears about unequal power relationships. When she finally got home, Lily immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mom, have you been crying?" Sarah hugged her daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and crayons. Adaptações, Isabella, Lily, Dona Rosa, Mrs. Smith, Eduardo Mendes, David Miller, Veronica Mendes, Veronica Miller, just a little sweetheart. Why? Sometimes adults disappoint each other. Was it Uncle David? The simple question hit Sarah like a knife. Lily had mentioned David a few times, always fondly, asking when she would meet the man who was helping her mother teach others. "Yes, sweetheart. Did he do something very bad?" Sarah hesitated. How to explain to an 8-year-old the complexities of betrayed trust, questionable intentions, power, and vulnerability? He wasn't completely honest with me." Lily processed the information with the seriousness that only children can apply to adult matters. "But he's not our friend anymore." "I don't know, Lily. I just don't know." That night, while Lily slept, Sarah read and reread every page of the dossier that Veronica had left. The invasion of privacy was systematic, detailed, disturbing. But there was also something that troubled her. Why did Veronica have access to this material? Why did it appear right now, when the relationship between David and Sarah was starting to evolve? On the other side of the city, David faced his own demons. He had called the private investigator, demanding that all copies of the report be destroyed. He had transferred $50,000 to the church's account, enough to keep the project running for years. And now he sat in his empty apartment, staring at the possibility that he had ruined the best thing that had happened to him in years. "You need to tell the whole truth," said Dr. Emily during an emergency session that David had scheduled for the next day. "To me and to her." "What truth?" "The truth about why you investigated Sarah, the truth about what really happened in your marriage, the truth about your feelings." David remained silent for a long time. "If I tell everything, I will lose her for good." "David, you've already lost her. The question now is whether there is any chance to regain her trust. And that only happens through total honesty. What if she can't forgive me? Then at least you'll know that you did everything you could. But if you don't try, you'll carry that guilt forever." It was wise advice, but terrifying. Because David knew there were even harder truths that he hadn't told even his therapist. Truths about his obsession with control, about his inability to trust, about the terrible fear of abandonment that led him to possessive behaviors. And the scariest truth of all, that he was in love with Sarah in a way he had never experienced before, and that losing her was revealing depths of pain he didn't know he possessed. The question was whether he would have the courage to fight for her, knowing that it would mean confronting not only his own demons, but also the ghosts of the past that Veronica had brought back to life. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the community center, and Sarah struggled to keep the literacy project running on her own. The students noticed David's absence, but Sarah simply said he had other commitments. The truth was that she missed him more than she would like to admit, not just his practical contribution, but his presence, his insights, even his occasional jokes that made the students laugh. "Miss Sarah," said Mrs. Smith after a particularly difficult class on a rainy Thursday, "you seem sad. Is it because of that handsome guy who stopped coming?" Sarah forced a smile. "It's nothing like that, Mrs. Smith. I'm just tired." "My dear," the elderly woman approached, placing a calloused hand on Sarah's arm. "When my husband died, I thought I would never trust another man again. But I learned that not every man is the same. Sometimes we judge everyone by the mistakes of one." The simple words echoed in Sarah's mind all the way home. She had been so focused on David's betrayal of trust that she hadn't questioned Veronica's motivations for showing up at that exact moment with that information. It was Lily who once again brought clarity with her childlike innocence. "Mom," she said while they ate plain pasta in the small kitchen, "do you remember when Aunt Jessica told everyone that I broke Grandma's vase?" "I remember." "But you didn't break it. But everyone believed her because she spoke first. Even you doubted me at first." Sarah stopped eating, looking at her daughter. "What are you getting at, sweetheart?" "Is Uncle David really bad? Or did someone just say something bad about him first?" The simple question hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. Why had she believed Veronica so easily? Why hadn't she given David the chance to explain himself completely? The dossier was real. The invasion of privacy had happened, but maybe there was more to the story. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She researched David Miller online. What she found surprised her. Old newspaper articles portrayed David as a respected businessman, known for progressive human resources policies and investments in social projects. There were photos of him at charity events, always discreetly in the background, never seeking the spotlight. An article from 3 years ago mentioned that he had anonymously funded scholarships for employees' children. But it was an article about his divorce that really caught her attention. The piece, published on a business gossip site, painted a very different picture from what Veronica had suggested. Sources close to the couple revealed that Veronica Miller had been having an extramarital affair for over 2 years. David Miller, known for his discretion, discovered the betrayal when he found intimate correspondence on the couple's shared computer. Despite the public humiliation, Miller refused to speak ill of his ex-wife in the press, limiting himself to saying that some people need different types of happiness. Sarah reread the passage several times. The David described there was not the controlling and possessive man that Veronica had. In the morning, Sarah made a decision. She called David's office but was informed that he was not taking calls. She then decided to go to Tech Innovate in person. The building in Midtown Manhattan was imposing, all glass and steel, but Sarah forced herself to enter. At the reception, a young blonde woman greeted her with courteous professionalism. "I would like to speak with Mr. David Miller. I am Sarah Johnson. Mr. David is not receiving visitors at the moment," the receptionist replied. "Can I take a message?" "Please tell him it's about the literacy project. It's important." The receptionist made a quick call, spoke softly into the phone, and then looked at Sarah with a surprised expression. He said to go up. 28th floor. The elevator seemed to take an eternity. Sarah observed her reflection in the polished mirror. Simple blouse, jeans, comfortable but worn shoes. She felt completely out of place in that luxurious corporate environment. David's office occupied an entire room, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York City. But what caught Sarah's attention the most was his appearance. 2 thin, deep dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. "Sarah," he said, rising from the chair with tired movements, "I didn't expect to see you here. We need to talk. For real this time." David gestured to a leather armchair in front of the desk. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you." Sarah sat down, watching him. "David, you look terrible." He gave a humorless smile. I haven't been sleeping well. Because of me. Because of many things. Mainly for ruining the best thing that happened to me in years. Sarah took a deep breath. I want you to tell me everything. From the beginning. Why did you investigate me? What was your real plan? David leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. There was no plan, Sarah. There was desperation. Explain. When I found out you had been fired for helping me, I panicked. The guilt was unbearable. But there was also something more. You had touched me in a way I didn't understand. Your kindness, your purity. I couldn't stop thinking about you. So you investigated me. I hired a private investigator to find you initially. But when he brought the detailed report, I should have stopped there. I should have destroyed everything. But I kept reading, trying to understand who you were, how I could help you without seeming like a creep. Sarah remained silent, allowing him to continue. The truth is, I was obsessed, yes, but not in the way Veronica suggested. I was obsessed with correcting an injustice, proving that there was still goodness in the world. And maybe I was obsessed with you. And what about your marriage? Veronica said you were controlling. David laughed bitterly. Veronica has a very creative relationship with the truth. I was the one being controlled, Sarah. She dictated where we went, who we associated with, how I should behave in public. When I started questioning that, she said I was being possessive. And about investigating her. That's true. In the last months of the marriage, I knew something was wrong. She was coming home late, lying about where she had been, receiving calls that she would hang up when I got close. Yes, I investigated her. And I discovered the betrayal. David looked directly at Sarah. It was wrong, I know. But I was desperate to understand why my marriage was falling apart. Sarah processed the information. David, why didn't you tell me this before? Why did you let Veronica plant those doubts? Because I was afraid that if you knew the whole truth about me, my mistakes, my obsession with control, my inability to trust, you would run away even faster. And now? Why are you telling me now? David stood up, walking to the window. Because losing you made me realize that I prefer to have the truth between us, even if it means losing you for good, than to live a lie. Sarah stood up as well, moving closer to him. David, look at me. He turned, and she saw unshed tears in his eyes. I researched you last night, she said. I read about the divorce, your social projects, how you treat your employees. Veronica's version doesn't match what I found. Sarah, I'm still hurt by the invasion of privacy. I'm still scared by the difference between our worlds, but she hesitated. But I am also in love with you. And that terrifies me. David felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. What did you say? That I am in love with you. With the man who stands at the back of the room, watching our students learn, as if it were the most important thing in the world. With the man who remembers the coffee I like. With the man who never tried to impress me with his wealth, but always tried to impress me with his humanity. David took a step toward her. Sarah, I'm in love with you. Completely, hopelessly in love. But we need rules, she said quickly. Total transparency. No more investigations, no more secrets. And you need to understand that I am not a project to be saved. I'm an independent woman who chooses to be with you. I understand. And I accept. And what about Veronica? She won't give up easily. Veronica is no longer part of my life. Whatever game she's playing, it's over now. Sarah studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of insincerity. What she saw was an exhausted man, vulnerable, completely open before her. There is one final condition, she said. What? I want to meet your employees. I want to understand who you really are when you have power over other people. Because if we are going to have a real relationship, I need to know all the versions of you. David smiled. The first genuine smile in weeks. I can arrange that, and I want you to come back to the classes. The students miss you. Mrs. Smith asks about you every week. Can I come back? You can. But this time David pulled her into his arms, and they kissed for the first time, a kiss that carried weeks of tension, pain, longing, and hope. When they separated, both were crying. Are you sure about this? David asked. Are you sure you want to try despite everything? I'm sure, Sarah replied. But David, if you disappoint me again, if you lie to me or try to control me in any way, this will be the last chance. Do you understand? I understand, and I promise I won't let you down. 3 months later, the literacy project had expanded to 2 classes. David returned as a volunteer, not as the main funder. They had secured partnerships with other companies and public agencies to ensure sustainability. Sarah continued living in her apartment in East Harlem, but David respected her space and independence. Lily had officially met David, and after a rigorous evaluation typical of 8-year-olds, she approved of the relationship. He's nice, Mom, and he makes you smile for real. Veronica tried a few more times to sabotage the relationship, but without success. David had learned to set firm boundaries, and Sarah had learned to trust her own perception of people. Do you think we're an unlikely couple? Sarah asked one night as they walked along Fifth Avenue, the same place where they met. We are, David admitted, but sometimes the best things in life are unexpected. And don't you miss your old life? The sophisticated women, the fancy events? David stopped, turning to face her. Sarah, that life was empty. You gave me purpose, not just through the project, but by showing me what it means to love someone, not for what they can give me, but for who they are. And who am I? You are the strongest woman I've ever met. You're brave, compassionate, stubborn, he smiled, and absolutely beautiful when you're mad at me. Sarah laughed, pulling him by the hand. Come on, Lily's waiting for us for dinner. And you promised to help her with the science project. As they walked together through the illuminated streets of New York City, they both reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A rainy morning, a gesture of kindness, a series of misunderstandings and painful revelations, all culminating in something neither of them had expected to find. True love, built on foundations of honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that the best things in life sometimes come disguised as complications. A year later, on the same rainy January morning they met, they returned to Fifth Avenue. But this time, when they saw someone in need of help on the sidewalk, they stopped together. And when they got to work together, no one was punished for an act of compassion. On the reception wall of Tech Innovate, the sign still read, "Small gestures can change entire lives." But now David knew that real change requires more than gestures. It requires the courage to face the truth, the humility to acknowledge mistakes, and enough faith to believe that love can overcome seemingly insurmountable differences.